Okay, so hi everybody. So as Louise said, I'm going to talk about what's important to the business from a content planning point of view, and within that, there's I split that out into content consumption, distribution, and then promotion. So the Content Marketing Association has listed 7 key attributes for content. So the first one being that it's produced for a brand. It's to develop a relationship between the brand and the consumer. It works across any medium or channel, so be that social, email, display, video, influencer marketing. It's measurable. I will discuss measuring content more specifically on later learning lunches because there's quite a lot to go through there. Is engaging. So this is obviously one of the key elements of content, is that it has to engage the consumer. If it doesn't engage the consumer, then no relationship will be built. Multifaceted. So content has to answer many different elements across the various channels that are used, and it has to be effective. So it has to be consistent and it has to have longevity. So ultimately, good content drives leads. So whatever those leads are for the business, they will differ from business to business. So 70% of marketers make use of content marketing, with content now accounting for 20% of marketing budgets, and this across various degrees, and this is on the rise. 70% of adults see content marketing in some form every month. 50% of consumers said content made a positive impact on their buying decision, and 61% said that content made them regard the brand more positively. So content, if done well, should always have a positive impact on the brand. And then 5 key aims for content marketing. So this will be the same across all brands. So sales and qualified leads. So obviously this is the key bottom line for all businesses. They just may differ from business to business. So some businesses it may be a case of driving cold hard sales. For others, it may be a case of driving a sign up or opening an account. Ultimately, you want to drive new customers and then retain those customers. Building your brand, so that goes hand in hand with retaining customers. And by retaining the customers and growing your customer base, you're obviously building your brand. Multimedia, so again, as I mentioned before, it needs to run across multiple channels and work across all of those channels, and longevity as well. So it shouldn't be just a flash in the pan piece of content. So when you're putting your content strategy together, you need to look at it kind of in advance. So is the messaging going to be consistent? Is this something that we can continue to run across various months, across kind of continuing months? So this is something I came across that I thought was quite interesting and quite fun. It's from eConsultancy. So it breaks it out into kind of the 8 key elements of content marketing. So obviously the content strategy is the overarching strategy. And then within that, they've broken out the format. So is this articles? Is it video? Is it social? Is it print? And then within that, there's the content type. So testimonials, demos, best practice, how-tos. Then we move on to the specific platform. So is it running across different websites? Is it for blogs? Is it to run offline, Twitter, Facebook, for example? And then we move on to the metrics, which will obviously differ depending on the platform. So these can range from page views to new leads and to downloads. And then we've also got our goals, which is obviously the ultimate aim for all content activity. And again, these can differ depending on kind of the goals of the business and depending on the channel being used. So is it about driving traffic? Is it about driving leads? Or is it purely about driving engagement with the brand or with the content? Sharing triggers, I think, is something that can get overlooked. I'm sure all of you, when you've shared or seen content in the past, and certain things make you want to share a piece of content more, and that's generally something which causes an involuntary reaction within the consumer. So, is it funny? Is it moving? Is it cute? Is it disgusting? Is it uplifting? So, something which drives a response in the user is something that they're more likely then to share amongst their own context. And then a checklist. So check before any piece of content goes out. Is your tone of voice right for the audience and for the channel? Have you checked your calls to action? Does it invite feedback? Are your brand guidelines consistent? So all of this needs to be in place across all channels before it can go out to the consumer. So content distribution. So this is about identifying and segmenting your audience, which must be done accurately in order to engage with your desired consumers. So if you work for a company where there's multiple brands or multiple products or multiple different services, it's just a case of segmenting your audience to make sure that you're serving the right product to the right consumer at the right time. And And content can be seeded across multiple distribution channels, and I'll go into them all in a little bit more detail as I go through. So there's social, display, programmatic, affiliates, influencers, email, mobile, and obviously offline as well. So we'll cover a bit later on as well how I guess how things have changed in the past. Obviously, back in the past, everyone used to kind of taking content offline. It'd be more print, it'd be more TV. And now in the future, everything's it's gone more online. It's more about social, it's more about display, and it's more about snackable, lean forward content. So content promotion. So how do we ensure we're making the most of each of the various distribution channels? So essentially you need to make sure that you've got a good relationship between your promotion and your distribution channels. And if those two work well together and complement each other, you should ultimately drive success and engagement with your brand. So social. So I won't go into all of these. I won't go into all of these in too much detail because Becca, our social expert at WilsonCooke, has gone into social in detail on previous learning lunches, and will do again in the future. It's just to show, kind of give an overview of the different types of channels and the different types of social channels specifically. So I guess the most kind of well-known ones are Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, and LinkedIn. But then you've also got Vimeo, you've got TikTok, you've got Snapchat, you've got Reddit. So there's multiple different channels that you can run across for social, depending on what it is that you want to achieve. So when you're looking at social, I guess one of the main things is choosing your platform. So making sure that you're choosing the right platform for what you want to achieve and for your consumer. So who are your audience, I guess, is the main overriding question. So are they B2B? Are they B2C? Are they old? Are they young? Do they have pre-identified interests? What is your overarching goal? What will your tone be? So for example, the tone that you use on TikTok or Snapchat will be different from the tone you use on LinkedIn. What content will you publish? Again, similarly, if you're looking at kind of short form content or short videos, that would be different from what you push out across LinkedIn, which is more about thought leadership or white papers or infographics. And then how often and when do you want to post? So for example, Twitter, this will be multiple posts per day, and then maybe Facebook and LinkedIn, maybe look at 2 or 3 posts per week. So again, it's just looking at choosing your platform, making sure that you're set up to make the best use of that platform. Display. So there's multiple. Display kind of encompasses lots of different things. So there's GDN and websites, which kind of I guess go hand in hand. So they're about driving kind of short, sharp pieces of content which you want to encourage the user to drive an action. So for example, it may be about driving them to push them down the sales funnel to make a purchase or make a booking or whatever it may be. So GDN is good for retargeting in hand with PPC. Websites, so for example, you may want to run across The Guardian or The Telegraph. So it's about running your brand against specific content across an existing website. High impact goes hand in hand with websites. So I'm sure some of you may have seen in the past when you've gone onto a website, maybe the entire page explodes, or maybe there's a function to actually interact with an ad as it sits on the page. These tend to be more B2C because they're quite expensive, and they're more about driving an engagement than about driving a sale or a purchase, but they do tend to work quite well. And then you've got VOD and mobile. So mobile, you could create apps, and it's also about making sure that the content that you're delivering across desktop also works well across mobile and is mobile optimized. And then VOD. So VOD is more kind of, I would say, broadcast VOD. So it's about generating video content that is relevant to specific broadcast channels. So, for example, ITV, 4OD, there could be a program on cooking or sports, and you want your video content to appear within that content. And they tend to work quite well. Again, less about driving leads and more about driving brand awareness and engagement. Native and advertorials kind of go hand in hand. So an advertorial is, as it sounds, it's kind of a mixture. It's kind of a toss up between an advertorial, an advert, and an editorial. So it appears within the editorial of a site. So it kind of sits seamlessly within the website rather than looking like an advert. And they tend to be longer form content. So while still maybe less than 1,000 words, they're more about kind of driving, be more informative, to-dos, how-tos, that kind of thing, rather about driving a short piece of content which drives a specific media action. Native, so this ties also in with video. So for example, VOD is what you would call outstream, and native is more instream. So I'm sure when you've all scrolled through websites, sometimes the content on the page will split and you'll see a video there. So again, this is about aligning your brand with the relevant content on the website so that it sits within the editorial of the page. Sponsored content is similar to websites, but this can be done in the sense that you identify relevant content within a website, and then you may choose to sponsor that relevant content for a month, 2 months, whatever it may be, to the exclusion of all of the brands. And then finally, programmatic it's still content because you're still using the advert or the banner to produce a specific message, but it's less about appearing against relevant content and more about identifying relevant consumers based on their behavior. So, for example, they may have been on a website which is dedicated to kitchens or football or whatever it may be. You drop a cookie on them, and then it'd be a case of finding those users whenever they next appear on another website. So whilst the ad may not appear itself in relevant content, you're making sure that you're targeting a relevant consumer. Influencers. So this is something I mentioned on my previous learning lunch, so I won't go into too much detail now, but essentially influencers have pros and cons. If done well, they can be really effective. But I would say the key thing with influencers is to really do your research. So look at all the different influencers out there for your brand and find one that's most relevant. And once you've identified a kind of a short list of influencers, go through and see, have they worked with other brands before? Which brands have they worked with? How did their fans respond to that? What level of fans do they have? Are they just starting out? Do they have a lot of experience? Look at their page likes, their engagement rates. What's their tone of voice, and does that fit with your brand? What is the cost? So generally speaking, influencer marketing is still quite an unregulated industry. So it's hard to pinpoint an exact cost and how much things should cost. But generally speaking, depending on the more fans an influencer has, the higher the cost will be. So it's just about benchmarking that as far as you can. And also collaboration is extremely important with the influencer to make sure you're both on the same page, that there's clearly defined guidelines for both of you so that everybody is clear on what's expected. It should be mutually beneficial for both the brand and the influencer. It's not about controlling the influencer, because the whole point of influencer marketing is that you're kind of leaving it to them in a degree. You're giving them free rein, you're giving them the control, because you want them to engage with their fans. And if the content is too scripted, fans pick up on this and it can generally put them off. So as I've said, there's lots of pros and cons with influencer marketing. It's a growing market, and if done well, it's something that can be really beneficial for the company. Email. So email is something that we do quite a lot at WilsonCooke, and again, there's a lot of whilst it may seem quite a simple channel, there are a lot of factors to consider. So content, obviously when you're posting content across an email, the content needs to be readable, it needs to be concise, it needs to be clear, and the message that you want to get across needs to appear as close to the top as possible, so the user doesn't have to trawl through reams of content. So they know exactly what is required of them, and the information that they require is given to them up front. A lot of the time emails are generated across desktop, and mobile is overlooked, but so many, at least half of emails are read on mobile. So it needs to be a case that mobile functionality is also good, and that it's not just designed to work across desktop. The schedule, so this is a case of knowing your brand, I guess, and knowing your consumers. So when is the best time for you to send your emails out? So is it in the morning, the afternoon? Is there a specific time in the day or the month? Is it before and after? So again, it's just making sure that you're posting your email and your content at a time that is most beneficial and is likely to get the best response. Design and content go hand in hand. So the design and the content should complement each other. The design shouldn't be fussy, it shouldn't be over the top, and it shouldn't detract from the content and the message. So it should be eye-catching and colourful and draw the user to what it is that they need to do, but it shouldn't take them away for what it is that they need to do from the call to action. Segment, so this refers to your audience. So as I mentioned previously, if you've got a large customer database and you've got lots of different products and you've got lots of different services, you need to make sure that you're segmenting your audience database to make sure that you're sending the right email to the right consumer in order to make sure that you're getting the right response. Subject line is very, very important, because ultimately that is what the consumer sees first off. And if the subject line doesn't draw them in or engage them, the email won't be opened. It's good to A/B test these. So for example, you could send not multiple, but you could send 1 or 2 or 3 different emails with different subject lines to see which draws the best response. And similarly with calls to action should be clear. The reader should be clear what is expected of them, and they should sit quite high up within the body of the email as well, so the user can click through straight away without having to scroll all the way down to the bottom. And similarly, these can be A/B tested as well in terms of what drives the best response from the consumer. Is it book now? Is it find out more? Whatever it may be. And it's also good to make sure you don't have multiple calls to action within an email, because that tends to confuse the user. So it should be clear and minimal in terms of the number of calls to actions. And then finally, it's about encouraging engagement with your content. So this is obviously ultimately what underpins all forms of content. So it's about offering something of value for your consumer. They need to know that you care about them, that you've put due diligence in, that you've thought about them, that you've thought about their needs and wants, and that you are doing your best to answer their problems and their challenges, so that you can focus on the customer and give them what they want. So avoid generic content, because this is quite easily picked up. It should be content that's relevant, that's tailored, and that's topical to the consumer. Be positive. No one wants a negative Nelly. So you need to make sure that the message you're getting across engages with them and is positive. And then similarly, as I've just mentioned at the bottom, it's about encouraging comments and dialogue, because ultimately driving a brand forward, you need to make sure that you're engaging with your consumers. And if you've encouraged comments and dialogues and you've gone back to them and answered their problems, that's more likely to drive brand engagement and to retain your customers in the future. And that's me.